Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Nick.
What's up?
It's hot in Rhode Island.
Is it?
Yeah.
How hot is it today?
It's like 85.
So it's got to be like 86 here. So it's always like a degree warmer.
Right.
You're on the coast.
We're on the coast.
Jeff, so Tyler's not around today. He's doing some. Actually, I have no idea what he's doing. He just said he was not going to make it today.
Wow.
Yeah, you know what? I should probably know that. He probably told me, and I just forgot. But we got you as guest host today. And we got Trevor from Andersen Windows, which is cool because Andersen's a sponsor of this podcast. They're also a sponsor of your series called Sawdust. But he's a technical rep. I actually had his formal title up, and I should have had it earlier before I started. He's a senior technical and install rep. And he's been with Andersen for 10 years, but he specializes in the Big Door brand. Forgive me for bashing on Big Door as the brand name in this episode. I don't mean it with ill intent, but Jeff, the Big Door brand, which has been around for 10 years, has really, I think, in my opinion, has gained a lot of traction in the last 2-3 years in terms of what we're building. And I know down on the coast of Rhode Island, you guys are doing a ton of big doors.
Yeah.
And when you're thinking about the installation of them, what are some of those the biggest challenges that you face? And obviously we'll get into it with Trevor, but just for the listeners here.
Well, number one, we're traditionally used to a window coming pre-assembled, right? So you get it in a box, you open the box, there's the window, you put it in the opening. When you get a big door, it comes in about, 10 crates, 10 different boxes. So the sashes are, not installed, all the pieces. So it's intimidating from a standpoint of there's assembly, right? So there's assembly, and then the weight of it, those panels weigh a lot. Everything weighs a lot.
Yeah.
So I think it's, it's just a little more intimidating. You get a lot more reps installing a window, and then you get these big. If we go to any of my job sites, right, when we get a window delivery, all the windows get installed first, and then the doors. And that's not for a reason. It's because we don't want to do those yet.
Yeah, right. So let's do the easy thing. So at the end of the day, we can say first. On the daily log, it says we installed 47 windows.
Right.
Tomorrow, installed 2 doors.
1 door.
1 door. We'll get into it with Trevor. We'll talk about the technical stuff. He has quite a bit of insight into how this stuff works. But if you guys are considering installing a big door, he also lets you know that at the end of the episode who you should be contacting. So if you feel intimidated, don't. By the end of the episode, hopefully you feel a little bit more comfortable about doing it. And before we get into it, of course, this episode is brought to you by Andersen Windows. And if you're looking to make a big impact on your next project, check out Andersen's Multi-Glide Big Door. Well, how convenient we're talking about big doors in this episode. Well, this door is a game changer designed to fit openings up to 50 feet wide, 10 feet tall, and with sliding panels that can reach up to 60 inches wide. That's a big piece of glass. Whether your clients want a contemporary or traditional look, Andersen's got you covered with style options that suit any aesthetic. And get this, you can customize it to be straight. I said that wrong. You can customize it to be straight stacking or pocketing, and even add automation for an extra touch of modern convenience. Upgrade your projects with Andersen's Multi-Glide Big Door, the perfect blend of size, style, and functionality. Visit AndersenWindows.com today to learn more. This podcast is also brought to you by Buildertrend. Are you ready to close jobs in half the time, improve your productivity by 50%, scale to 8 figures? Well, thousands of builders like you are already doing this, and you can too with Buildertrend. If you heard of them before, you may assume they're just project management software. Well, think again. Not only does Buildertrend offer the tools for sales, project, customer, and financial management, but they also do advanced reporting and analytics, material rebates, online payments, cashback on purchases, monthly conferences, in-person consulting, financing, insurance, and the list goes on and on. So whether you've tried them in the past or you're just hearing about them now, get over to buildertrend.com and don't forget the /MC demo, and you can learn more about how to run and grow your entire business in one place. And also, guys, Contractor Coalition Summit Boston is coming up September. So head over to contractorcoalitionsummit.com, September 27th through the 30th. We're going to be in Boston. Tickets are limited to 30 people. And I'm not even sure how many we've sold to date, but I know Boston is proving to be our busiest event yet. So Friday, September 27th through Monday, September 30th. And we're going to be doing some pre-show activities, including touring some of my projects, including the 45 White Oak project. We just secured an awesome hotel, the Hotel AKA Back Bay. Brand new, will actually be open only for a month prior to this. So super excited. And yeah, we're going to have Mark LaLiberte there. He's going to be talking about, construction instruction, the future of construction. We get a couple other guest speakers, but myself, Tyler, Brad, and Morgan look to invite you to this event. If you want to secure your spot, make sure you head over to contractorcoalitionsummit.com, click on register, and we have a couple options. You can pay full ticket price today, or you can get a deposit down and pay before the event. And we do also offer a guest pass. So if you're bringing a business partner or spouse, we're happy to extend an invitation to the evening events for that guest. Trevor, where are you?
San Diego.
San Diego. How's the weather?
It's hot.
It's hot?
Yeah.
How hot is it?
I think today it cooled back down to like 85. I think yesterday was like 92, 93. So
damn.
I would just say like hot until somebody from Phoenix gets on the phone and then they say, no, it was 111, but that's 9 days in a row. And you say, okay, fine.
Dude, I don't know how the Phoenix guys do it. Brad was telling me, I think he had crews that would start at like 3 a.m. and they'd work 3 to 11. So they'd be home by the time it peaked heat. And he would post stories to be like 130 degrees. It's like, I don't know, man. I don't think I'm going to do that.
Hot,
that's a lot. I was hoping we could start early on a recent job we did in just outside of Las Vegas, and it was 113. And I said, so we're going to start at 4:30 in the morning, 5 a.m., right? And they said, no, because it's a partially completed community. They can't make noise before 7. So they got stuck during normal work hours and couldn't shift it forward, but it was warm. So
dang. Jeff, do you prefer the heat or the cold?
Cold.
Really?
Yeah.
Or you like skiing? But for work. Yeah. I mean, not in life, but for work.
Even for work, I'd rather add layers. Once you get to a certain heat index, you can't do anything more.
What about your hands? Like that my hands and feet were to always just freeze up, lock up. Like that was, and I tried everything. I was like, when I would work outside, I remember I bought heated socks, heated gloves. I'm like, I'd rather be sweating my ass off than dealing with cold. I don't know.
It's all what you get used to.
I suppose. Someone told me I had bad circulation in my hands, so I was like, what do I do to fix that? How do I get better circulation? But never figured that out. So Trevor, for those that don't know, you're with Andersen Windows. But give us a rundown of what you do with Andersen.
So I work basically to educate and build confidence with people when it comes to installation best practices on primarily big doors. So Andersen's big door line. And so I'm a install and technical rep, which can be anywhere from helping someone look through design criteria for, configuration or performance of a unit they want to spec, or working directly with builder, installer, on-site, or virtual training, things like that. Just helping them get prepped to, maybe it's their first lift slide or something like that. And so it's basically a technical advisement role, but through multiple different customer lines, from architect all the way to kind of final installer.
When did you guys develop the quote unquote big door line or brand?
So a little over 10 years ago, Andersen acquired Wyland Sliding Doors, which was in Oceanside, California, and that's where I was at the time. And so that's how I came to work for Andersen. And that was their acquisition of the lift slide. And prior to that time, they didn't have one. And then that brand formed soon after that, where they kind of pulled things together. Andersen developed the multi-glide, and then they already had their standard folding door, and they kind of pulled all that together. I think it's been about 10 years that they've started using that term to kind of encapsulate wide openings, tall openings. And so a few products fall into that category.
Is it product based or is it size based? Like what defines a big door?
That's a good question. It is product based. Though sometimes the considerations that we give, like a 10-foot tall door, they'll do a 10-foot tall door that's not a product big door, like some of the
just a regular swing door or something,
or even just giant casement windows or window walls or things like that can be a massive rough opening. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be the rough opening. But for Andersen, that's the lift slide, the multi-glide, the folding door, and pivot door, kind of the main four that typically fall into that category. And then they also look at the Andersen aluminum line that's made in Goodyear, Arizona. That also, I believe that qualifies as well. Those are big rough openings. It's a little bit different as we get into products that we're doing joint product lines on the same home and things like that, right? And so we'll give door classification and consideration and support to a home that has, we're just taking over the back patio door, right? And so it could be a normal size rough opening, but now we're putting in a pocket lift slide or something like that. And so then we're then providing additional support on the rest of the house that doesn't necessarily have, you're not putting a big door in every opening. They've got 400, 100 windows, whatever that may be elsewhere. But the nomenclature on that can be a tad confusing when you say, well, it's a big door. Well, is it just because it's tall? Is it because, what does that really mean? So yeah, I get that a lot.
Makes you wonder if they should rename it. Not that we're on here to rebrand Andersen's entire product line, but
yeah, I'm going to get a call after this and be like, why did you?
You're definitely getting a call. Yeah.
Yeah. That is. Talk about the nomenclature. Yeah, because that's where there can be some market confusion there when we're talking about, you use the term like multi-slide, for example, is difficult because Andersen makes multi-slides, meaning just any door product that has multiple panels that move in one direction, right? But then they also make a multi-glide, which is a specific product line. And so even within those, sometimes we're saying, okay, what product are we really talking about? Like when I get a call from a customer and they have installation questions or something like that, sometimes it can take them sending me a picture to just know what product it is we're talking about. Say, oh, I got a multi-slide, and then it turns out it's actually a lift slide, but they're using the term multi-slide like tissue or Kleenex, right? That they just say, oh, it's got panels moving more than one direction. Well, what does that really mean? How does it operate? What are we looking at? How big is it? Sometimes I can tell just by the size of the product that, okay, it's 12 feet tall. We're only talking about one or two product lines at that point, so I can kind of weed it down. But those kinds of terms like multi-slide or like bifolding. So people use bifolding when they mean biparting, or they because a bifolding door is also a biparting door if it meets in the middle. And so we try to go through those, and sometimes I end up asking a lot of questions just to clarify what exactly is it that we're talking about, and what are you hoping that I'm going to help you with.
Jeff, do you use a lot of lift slide or I know you use the multi-glide. I've seen those, but do you use lift slide?
We just started. We'd been using Centaur. I know that's a bad word for you, Trevor, but
no.
We had been using Centaur. We were an installer, so that product, sort of met all our application in terms of big openings. But with our relationship with Andersen, we've adopted the product line, and it works well for us.
They're a sponsor of your series, right? Your Sawdust series?
Yeah. Yep.
Nice.
Trevor, we're on a big job right now installing NQ Windows.
Ooh.
Yeah.
One of your other sister companies. I don't know how Andersen defines it, but
yeah.
That's a Canadian Windows company, right?
It's they're Quebec, and I think they're made in Italy. So it's a little, windows, big window package, about 100 windows, all historic right on the water. Incredible. They're so heavy. I think the average window's 500 pounds.
Oh, Jesus. You have a little lift going on, or are you using the wall?
We have a lot of lifts. Yeah.
A lot. I've looked at the MQ stuff. It's super nice. And I forget who I was chatting with at Andersen. Maybe I shouldn't even say this on the podcast, but I will anyway. I know that Drake's house was all an MQ line, which was a fun fact. I thought it was a fun fact. But we had looked at it for a project a while ago, and super nice stuff, super heavy. But that was a part of, Trevor, did you guys do a huge sprint where you acquired a bunch of businesses, or has this just been in over time, just acquiring businesses over time in terms of like window and door manufacturers, like the Weiland thing 10 years ago? Was MQ a similar time?
MQ is a little bit after that. It does feel like that a bit. They don't call me on those meetings when they're buying companies, right? But it does seem like it ramped up a bit. There was MQ and then Heritage Windows, which is now the Andersen aluminum line, and that was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And the folding door was prior to the acquisition of Weiland, and so they definitely pulled a lot of the best stuff around. Early on working for Weiland, I was actually working on a lot of projects on Long Island that were MQ window packages and Weiland lift slides together. And so from customers who had already seen that those kind of went together, and that when they're looking for that ultra luxe, so the customers had already made some of those decisions. Same with, like a multi-glide door and a Heritage window package. So the customers had already seen some of those and put those together. And then now it's all under the Andersen, brand name. But it does seem like it's ramped up a bit.
And prior to that, there was Eagle, right? They acquired Eagle, which I had used Eagle probably early 2000s, and then Andersen bought it, and that just became the E series.
Ah, that's what E stands for.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, what was cool about them is that you could get it cladded in any color under the rainbow. So they had some proprietary way of, powder coating or whatever they do for like a.
So you just order any color you want.
Yep, you gave them a sample.
That's cool. Yeah, and they would match it. Trevor, I think of like Jeff builds down on the coast a lot, and that's why I had asked about the lift slides. I think that from a performance perspective, they at least my general understanding is they perform better because you're essentially moving the unit where you need and dropping it. And now you have, a much stronger gasket than say one of those felt gaskets or the brush gaskets and things like that. But that's an easy thing to point at as a failure point, right? For a quote unquote product. But in terms of, in terms of the actual install, when you really dig into why some of these doors and windows fail, it's typically installer error. So I'm curious, specific to big doors, because, I think that can be a daunting name, and, and probably a lot of why you have a role in this space. But what are some of the common misconceptions in terms of the way these doors are installed, what is available in these doors, just generally speaking, like, I think summarizing what this product is one thing, but answering to some of the misconceptions that kind of linger out there, is another.
Yeah. It's a hard question, because sometimes we're talking about, like you said, like a failure, and with like a lift slide as a good lead in. The lift slide, you're activating and deactivating its water feature, right? And depending on the design, you're actually sitting down on the finished floor. And so sometimes even something as subtle as finished floor choice that we're not really talking about, if you're talking about door installers, they're not designing the interior of the house or talking about what the transition looks like, but whether or not that door is sitting down on something that's flush and flat, as opposed to something that's cobblestone that naturally creates water pathways under the door, right? Whether or not it leaks or has a water leak could be completely related to finished floor choice and has nothing really to do even with the installer. But I think the earliest that we are able to talk about this to ensure success is really just the roof opening, and that sometimes we're stuck trying to cram a product into enough rough opening that wasn't necessarily designed early on to be able to handle that. Like a lift slide, for example, is a product that has, the performance comes from sub-sill track, right? And so if you just said standard remodel or standard building practice, and you've just got, sheathing down over joists or whatever it may be, and that's the bottom of your RO, right? Well, that would fit a lot of multi-slide products and a lot of standard patio products, but it wouldn't fit a lift slide because a lift slide has too much depth requirement below that. And so sometimes the product's ordered and it's spec'd, and customer was looking for a certain performance criteria, and then it got changed to a lift slide, and now here we are installing, trying to figure out how to gain 2 inches of depth to our RO, which is not easy. Nobody wants to cut joists. Nobody wants to do that. I mean, it becomes kind of a big can. I think that's where sometimes the fear of tackling a big door product, because somebody's experienced that kind of failure or hard installation in the past because we didn't get the roof opening right to begin with. It's like someone putting in a casement window, and it's like a small scope, right? And they say, okay, well, the casement window is dragging. Well, it's because the roof opening wasn't correct. It's like, well, we still put it in wrong. Right, we could have waited and made corrections so that we get that long-term use out of that for that customer, so the homeowners, not specing that. Same with big doors, right? Big doors, if we have our roof opening correct, and if we have our header spec, it's also a really big one too. That, deflection, right? I mean, we're talking about an opening is potentially 60 feet wide, right, with no structural support, or an outward corner post with no structural support. That's just begging for a conversation later on. What's up there? How much weight went up there? How much has our dead load been applied prior? And so there's just so much that goes into the opening that really has nothing to do with the product, but just whether or not we've prepped appropriately for that product to, ensure success, right? Because I come from service, and I used to say that I get professionally yelled at by homeowners, and so no one ever calls you if they're happy, right? If they call me because I have to go fix something, they're already upset. And so now, being more on the front end of it, it's what can we do to ensure long-term use and long-term success? And most of the time it's just, let's get the roof opening right. Let's retain all of our adjustability for long-term, service adjustment, as opposed to using it all up during the install. If the roof opening is too tight, we don't have space. That means that 9 years later, there's some natural structure, natural settling, things like that. We want service to be able to make an adjustment and keep it going, right? We don't want to have to stop there.
Yeah, it's interesting because we just went through this. We're not using the Andersen products, but we just went through this whole window and door exercise for our Wellesley project, and these were, we basically couldn't frame until we answered everything, and we have all lift-in slides, everywhere throughout that house. And I remember being in one of those meetings, and we were talking about, eighth, a quarter inch deflection, super, super tight tolerances. And it was just, everyone was in that meeting, and everyone had something to contribute. And we ended up with, a beam in the back of the house that was 3 LVLs and 2 pieces of steel bolted together, because we had assumed one deflection. And then the window manufacturer was like, no, you actually can't, it has to be 1/8 of an inch over, it was 21 feet. And, and they were playing out these live load situations, and we have this heavy cladding, and it was interesting. But furthermore, it was, how that door got connected to the structure. And, I think of a traditional American window, you get nailing flange, sometimes you're putting a screw through the jamb into the framing and you're shimming it. But these doors, it's, you're sitting, sub-sill, for that it's sitting way down, not on the subfloor. It's essentially on top of foundation for us, shimmed up about, in our case, it's 2 inches off the foundation, top of foundation. And then on the top has these clips that or these screws, I forget what they're called. I want to say they're called like turbo screws or something, but essentially they screw into the structure and hold the unit from moving. But when you set them a certain depth, which is why you have such a tight tolerance, you can't be over on the opening. And it gets to a point where it's essentially a slip shaft that allows the window to move up and down if it needs to, or the structure to deflect without pushing on the window. Where if you're using a traditional screw, now you're pushing on the window.
Right.
And it was just interesting to hear the thought process all the way to, because I'd asked the question, like, why are we adding steel? Like, this seems like this is such a last minute thing. We're literally about to frame, and you're adding, we added a 1/2 inch, basically 2/4 inch plates of steel, 40 feet long. And and it came down to, they're like, well, in a scenario where it snows, there's a snow load and this and that, it's going to be difficult for that door to operate. And
right.
you think about what they're kind of forecasting, and then you think about your previous experience opening even the most traditional sliding door, and the pain in the ass it is when it sticks. And you're feeling about that. It's like this, like, oh, why is this door sticking? And then it just becomes a nuisance. Next thing you know, the door's off the track, and it's a pain in the ass, and you're damaging it because you're opening. And all that to be said is, like, this is kind of, going back to what I preach the most. It's like the planning and the thought process in building, and the consideration of what you're doing in these openings way in advance. Because you said it yourself, it's like sometimes you're getting to a job or a remodel job or a house that they built, and they haven't picked their window package yet, and then they decide to put a lift slide in where it was going to be a multi-glide. It's like, well, that doesn't work.
Right.
And it's this product of just, like, I don't know, just like being so reactive to the way we build, where you're just, what makes it, I guess what I'm getting at, my long drawn out thought here is, what people fear in putting a big door in or these lift slides in is the fact that they have to think about it months in advance. It's not, all right, here's my opening, how do I do this?
Yeah, there's definitely that. I mean, when you think about, like you said, your beam choice, right? Your structural support. And you said that I think you're talking about there's a slip channel where you can actually move the head up and down for deflection and things like that. If you've been in custom home building or big door space long enough, somebody's got a door that it didn't slide, and they're trying to plane the top of the door. They're trying to make more space, because the last thing that I live in the land of stucco, right? And whether you're brick or somewhere else in the country, the last thing you want to do is, the only thing we can do is cut away all the stucco on the outside of the house to get to the nail flange, uninstall the entire unit, and plane the head and put it back in. It's like, that's such an extreme situation. Nobody wants to do that, right? Nobody wants to go through those things, or we're trying to, remove interior casing and pull shims out and try to, adjust it, because those concerns have come up for people in the past on certain door openings. That's where sometimes with some of the products that we manufacture, we have, built-in adjustment to the head track, right? And so that means that that's mutually exclusive with a nailing fin, right? You can't have a nailing fin and have an adjustable head track that can operate, right? Because otherwise we're just going to be pivoting on the outside of that nail fin. So that's where sometimes when we're, educating someone that's putting in one of those products, we call them jacking screws, and they're using a jacking screw, which is different from a jam jack, but that it's got up to a 1/2 inch of adjustment. And normally when we say that, there's a big, sigh of relief, because we say, okay, how bad was that terrible job that you had where it sagged and everybody hated each other? How far did it go? So it went like 3/16, right? And the door wouldn't operate with that 3/16. It says, yeah, everybody's got a header spec. Like, we as a manufacturer, we have a spec of how much deflection can happen post install and have the door still operate the way it's supposed to. But what if I told you that 9 years later you can adjust it upward up to a 1/2 inch? They say, well, that'd be great, but you can't. And then that's where you do your Havana White and say, well, look at this little thing that I've got here. And so, the ability to do that, we're trying to make things easy to install, but we're also trying to use features that just save us. And so that means that we might be looking at it and planning it a little bit differently and moving towards something ceiling with backer rod and caulk as opposed to more of a traditional window opening like a nail flange. We're going to J-roll flashing or something over the top of it, right? Those are different, and those are trade-offs in order to get that ability. And sometimes we're so used to saying our performance comes from nail fin and WRB wrapped to the interior and fold to flap up and these kind of traditional building trends. But there are, ASTM specs for how to do, block construction with that. And then, hey, we do it that way. And now suddenly we can adjust the head up to a half inch in the middle of the opening. That it doesn't mean that let's pick a worse header design that's going to sag because now we don't have to think about it as much. No, it's still spec the header the way we're supposed to, but now we've got the ability to adjust it. And so, some things come from prep early on, some things come from just design of the product, and then also product choice, making sure that, is it even going to fit in the opening? Right. And then is it the right fit for the opening? Because sometimes you get people ordering pocket doors and it's a 6-panel single direction pocket door, but they've got a 2x6 wall. They're not, not really sure how to suddenly make that space fit. And so we try to, that's where I always like to get the call as early as I possibly can, right? As early as I possibly can to be talking about, are we still framing? Great. Let's look at some potential changes that we can make just to say, let's make this fit as easy as we possibly can.
Yeah, but why is it getting, that's my argument. Why is it getting to that point? Why are they framing? Why are they already and I know that's the way a lot of I'm going to just classify, that's how most people build, is that they just move and then they figure it out. And I have such an issue with that because that's why you run into issues. That's why you have inefficiencies. That's why you're undoing work and redoing things. It is statistically proven that you're going to make mistakes. There's going to be stuff that you have to redo no matter what. No project is ever going to be perfect. Why are we adding on this additional layer of, hey, let's just not plan and figure it out in the field? So you're just adding additional opportunity for this stuff to go wrong and be wrong. And it's and that's where you take this all the way to finish. This is where you end up with soffits in places you didn't intend to have a soffit, or a wall that you padded out because you didn't consider that plumbing had to drop down to the floor below, and now your wall is too close to your casing, so you're ripping casing in half to fit your door jamb in. And I know I know, Jeff, you're the same way. It's this is the stuff that drives us crazy. It's we want the details to be right, and I'm not Trevor, I'm not bashing you for getting involved when they're framing, but it's it shouldn't even get to that point. You should be working with the architect, or you should be working with the design team or the panel manufacturer or the builder, whoever's in charge of prepping and getting that job from paper to site, rather than saying, all right, you only have 2x6 wall, let's pad the wall out and you can fit your pocket door. Because you've solved one issue, but in about 3 months, you're going to realize that issue just caused that solution just caused 2 other issues when your cabinets don't fit or something else.
There's a balance. Yeah. There's a balance, though, in that you have to be careful not to be so afraid of it that it's analysis paralysis, that then you never start. You would never start. If you had to work out every detail, you would never start. Meanwhile,
I don't disagree with that at all. But I feel this is easy stuff. This is easy stuff to figure out. In terms of knowing that you need, you need a door there. So let's work that out. Yes, you're going to realize okay, well, just exactly how does that hinge end up mounting to the concrete? It's okay, we can figure that out in the field because we don't really know where top of concrete.
Yeah, sometimes it's a trigger point, right? When someone uses the word pocket or corner or 14 feet tall, or then they start thinking, I need to be looking at this earlier. But because there's so many, 3-panel back patio sliding doors that are just sitting directly on the sheathing. And so whether you have 3/4 interior hardwood or LVP, that just changes your interior, build up and step over height. So you can just, bang it out. You can yank that one and put a new one in. It fits in the same RO. All we got to do is look at 2 dimensions, right? How wide is it? How tall is it? Perfect. It's going to fit. And so sometimes though, when we're looking at Like analysis paralysis is just a great term. I use that a lot when we're talking early on with architects and things like that. And so sometimes it's just education, right? It's sometimes the second one that we get better. And so first time we're working with that dealer or that architect, and we're able to educate as early on as we possibly can. And so, like I said, sometimes it's that point where we say, okay, it's got pockets, or it's a curved piece of glass or something like that. Then suddenly we're looking back at it. But like a lift slide could just be a 3-panel lift slide with 2 jambs, right? There's no pockets, there's nothing else there. And so the gut initial feeling would be, oh, that's just going to fit in the same opening as the previous 3-panel slider that came out, the OXO, and it's like, well, no, it won't, because the vertical RO is no longer the key factor, right? You've got part of that RO is below your sill. It's not going to fit. And so sometimes we get stuck with what feels like a standard opening, but isn't. And so that's where just our pre-planning as much as we possibly can. And sometimes decisions are made later, right? Sometimes we're talking to the framer because, the homeowner went over to the neighbor's house, and the neighbor's house spec'd some of the product, and that house is already done. And now they're coming back and saying, I want that door. And now we're making those, those design changes later, right? Then we do the best we possibly can. But that's where, sometimes the product choice, we've wound our way down where something that is important to somebody like water rating or something like that, they've made a decision based on the product that has other repercussions, right? Like the highest water rating means you have a subsill assembly. But sometimes they're going after a spec that's beyond what they really wanted anyway. And so that we see that a lot, like on the West Coast, we'll see people speccing, like homes in Malibu, for example, high-end community, but they're speccing Miami-Dade building products for Malibu, right? Not realizing that, you're going to get the same water rating, but now you have to use impact glass. Malibu doesn't really need impact glass. And so sometimes we have these design considerations. Well, now we've got a door panel that's 2 to 3 times the weight that it was previously. Now we have floor deflection issues. Now we need to shore up, where you can no longer even install this. And so sometimes we're just trying to work through what's your goal? I end up asking a lot more questions, like, what are you trying to achieve? What's the most important thing to you? And sometimes it's water, sometimes it's size, configuration, performance, aesthetic, could be anything, right? But sometimes we've ended up somewhere where we're able to work through them and potentially offer another solution, whether it's a different product type or just a different change from one sill to another sill, so that, hey, it works and we're still achieving what you wanted, but we're definitely making it easier. And we didn't have to go down that path. And sometimes people just aren't aware of those product offerings, or looking at only one piece of the pie. They're only looking at water performance. They're only looking at glass type or STC ratings, or pick your thing that's important to you. Everybody's got a different thing, right?
Well, I mean, another example of that is the solar heat gain coefficient. Something that I gave very little thought to beyond like what was spec'd by the architect, and we moved forward and we ordered the doors and windows. The door and window manufacturer, they agreed that was the right rating. Architect, like everyone's good. And then we were in design with the HVAC, and I get this comment from the engineer. He's like, hey, your solar heat gain coefficient rating is too low on the backside of that house. Like you're gonna have the heat gain that you're gonna get during the summer is increasing the cooling requirement. So I go back and like, oh yeah, well, it's heating dominant climate, so we were trying to make sure we're doing a decent balance, so during the winter it would keep the house warm. So I'm in the middle here, and finally I was like, hold on, I just need everyone, like, this is beyond me. Let's just have a group call and chat about this. Only to find out that by focusing on the benefit of heating the house with solar in the winter, we literally doubled the size of the cooling equipment for the summer. So we made one minor glass change. Thankfully, it was literally 3 days before they ordered the glass. One minor glass change saved us, basically downsized all of our cooling equipment by 50%. And it was just, at that time, it's like, no one made a wrong call. It all, like, everything made sense to each person individually. Like your point, it's like, but there's all of these components that are important, or all of these different components that are important to different people.
Right. Right.
And this is why, and to Jeff's point, it's like, this is why people, this is the extreme is like, this is why you never start, because there's so many decisions to make. And at some point you're going to screw up anyway.
Right. Hey, Trevor, I have a question about you were talking about how some of the installs don't have a nailing flange and rely on backer rod and some type of sealant. And I bring that up because these MQ windows that we're installing are installed that way. And at first, it scares you because we're so used to nailing flanges. One of the extreme advantages in this case, because these windows are so heavy, with that type of installation, you can install them from the inside, which is a huge benefit. But what do you find as percentage of failure in terms of water infiltration when that's the installation method?
Almost none. And I know that's going to sound like, oh, he's saying they never leak. No, I mean, things happen, right?
Yeah.
There's building issues, installation issues, manufacturing errors in the product. But with just backer rod and caulk as an installation method, as opposed to nailing fan, I don't notice a significant difference between those two.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's something else. Like for the products that are that have no fin, that have the backer rod and caulk because they have the adjustability and the jams in the head. Those products we end up seeing really the transition in the corners. Right. Yeah. The way that they're choosing to flash it, because it doesn't have a nail flange go all the way around on all four sides. They can kind of get, okay, I got to appropriately seal the side jams in the head, and they kind of overlook the transition between the bottom of the jams and the sill. And so around the product down there seems to be a point where we're trying to make sure that what are we looking at? What are we looking at here? Especially if it's a sub-sill door. Because when the installation is done, they've sealed the side jams, they've sealed across the head, but the bottom corner, there's no finished floor in there yet. So nobody can do any flashing, no one can do any prep in that bottom corner. The installer's gone. The finished floor isn't there, but it's still an entryway into the house. And so sometimes the handoff of when those things are done changes for like the insert style MQ windows. Appropriate, materials, for what the WRB is, what silicone type they're using, how big the gaps are, things like that. Like if you're trying to bridge some massive gap because the RO is a little too wide, we can see pullback and failures and things there. Yeah. But don't really see a lot of failure with that, because like in the time that I've spent working with flanged windows, we also see people that are, installation errors where they're not flashing appropriately, or they're just putting silicone behind the flange and we've got a leak behind the WRB above it. There are issues. Things can happen no matter the practice, right?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. But it does give you versatility in terms of modification to the opening or modification to the window relative to the opening at a later date.
Yeah, and just like offset, because like you say, you got a nail fin. Well, now we're looking at different molding options on the outside, and the way that we're going to case this window on the inside or the outside is a fixed point, right? Like that nail fin needs to be up against the sheeting or the framing, right? Yeah. But if it's it's flangeless, right? What's important? Are we trimming that to the inside? Are we trimming it to the outside? We're going to do like a stucco return or a stone return on the outside or a drywall return on the inside. And so it gives a lot of design flexibility on where that mounts within the opening as well. Especially when you look at, with windows, the MQ windows, can have a thicker jamb, but the more panels you're adding, even with just like a sliding window or a door, you can end up with really large jams. Yeah. And so the question then becomes, where are we setting that within the opening? And so because there is no nailing flange, it's an advantage because
you can go either way.
We can put it where we want, which is nice.
Yeah, we ended up going flush to the outside. It just made it a whole lot easier. Then your trim package, just caulks right up against the jam itself, and it really has a nice tight seal. We did tape first, and then sealed AZEK exterior trim that mounts right up against it. Comes out nice.
That's great. Recent MQ install that I was a part of, we did back rod and caulking per the spec around the outside, and then we had a whole lot of extra rolls of flashing tape sitting in the truck, and so we actually just flashed over it because their trim package on the exterior was going to completely hide the outside of the jam.
Yeah.
This is like, we've got it, let's put it there.
Yeah.
I mean, might as well. It's going to take an extra 5 minutes per opening,
right?
And it's been, nobody's called, and they probably would have if it was leaking. So yeah, I mean, sometimes we can go above and beyond, which, sometimes you read these installation manuals from us or other manufacturers where the silicone and flashing and WRB is like 90 steps. And you're like, okay, this seems a little excessive. I understand you're trying to cover your bases, but okay, let's be like, what do I really need to do? Yeah. But with those guidelines, I mean, I never want to get called afterward. Right. And if that means that I'm going to make sure that my backer rod is sized appropriately, like that per the gap, right, and that I'm using the appropriate sealant there, and then depending on the building opening, whether it's flush to the outside, it depends on who's putting it in. Like your choice is the choice that I would make. Like I think flush to the outside, the easiest I can make it for me to appropriately flash. I'd rather work as a finish carpenter in the interior to trim out the interior differently, as opposed to figuring out a unusual flashing solution for uneven surfaces.
Yeah.
Right. It's all one plane. It's easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. It's definitely for us, we're on the Atlantic Ocean everywhere. So we've got all kinds of conditions. So we really have to treat it incredibly detailed.
Yeah, and I think, like Trevor, you were saying, it's simplifying that process too, where a lot of times you see these flashing details, how all this stuff integrates, it just becomes super complicated, right? And sometimes like an origami of materials, trying to all come together, and the more complicated it becomes, the more prone to failure it is. Where that's one of the things I love about the backer rod and caulking and these flangeless windows is that, you're installing them and you're essentially just bridging that gap. I have nothing specifically against a nailing flange window, but I'm curious at your thoughts, because for example, when we post about tilt turn windows, social media specifically loses their mind about how us Americans are so far behind, and they've been using tilt turn windows for 30, 40 years, and this isn't new technology, blah, blah, blah. Right. But do you have any, insight as to why that is? Like, why is the US using these nailing fan windows and everywhere else is using these, these punched openings and essentially clipped or screwed units that they're then bridging the gap and no nailing fins?
Yeah. I don't know why adoption, comes in phases of different design trends. I mean, with, like you said, it's social media. It almost feels like social media is driving the design trend for all of us at this point anyway. Right. And
that's fair.
Yeah. So there's some of that going on, but like with flashing specifically, or why we work those ways, I think it really just comes down to design and adjustment. And like the lift slide, you look at a lot of those products and a lot of the MQ products, a lot of these designs were Italian designs or German designs, and they've kind of made their way into America. Like the lift slide wasn't originally made here, right? And so I think that sometimes it just takes adoption. And like tilt turn windows, the first time I operated one, I thought I was going to die. I didn't realize it was going to fall inward, and right. And I was laughed at, and that was okay, but sometimes we're just not used to it and not even aware that these are options. And so I think when it comes down to, design with how we're installing it, or the flashing, or even just like operation, whether or not we're doing a reverse stack handing that's more common in a different country than it is in the US. Sometimes it's just realizing that it's even an option. And then also why would I even want that?
Right. Yeah, it's funny you say that because I don't remember if it was Andersen or someone else, but I had asked like, why not bring tilt turn manufacturing to the U.S.? And I'm not saying that there's no one here, but it's a small. There's very few. Like if you're ordering tilt turn windows, they're typically coming from overseas.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, why why don't you have a manufacturer here? And someone was telling me the only market in the U.S. that has it are the more affluent coastal communities. Like middle America, like the general population in the U.S. like there's no market for it.
Right.
It's an unusual window. I mean, they're cool, right? You get
unusual, but for us,
yeah.
The Europeans kind of had a head start on us. We've been building homes for 200 years. They've been building them for 2,000 years.
I know, but like you would think that it's like, oh, that's what those perform better. Like I think performance is becoming so. I mean, that's what's driving that decision too. Performance. The performance requirements for building homes is just getting stricter and stricter. Yeah. So it's and I know like you guys are constantly innovating and looking at performance. Like Tyler and I came out to your facility and saw the way you test this stuff, and it's crazy, but it's funny to me that we're still using like the U.S. technology. And I'm not saying it's wrong or not. It's just I'm completely commenting on the fact that I get harassed on TikTok about talking about tilt turn windows, but it's just interesting to see how there's different approaches. But we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, right? Like we're talking about performance, cost efficiency, energy efficiency, huge sight lines, clear glass. Like we all have the same goal when you break it down.
Right. And there's trade-offs with some of those too, right? It's like the more that we're going to keep out air and water, the harder a door or window is to operate, right? The more gaskets and brush and things you add, well, the harder it is to slide. That's like the advantage of a lift slide because you can just basically turn it off. You can disengage it, and so it's going to, when it's sliding. And so, or with like thermal performance, like you were talking about, you had to change the glass on that project. And so sometimes we're saying, okay, well, hey, you look at like Title 24 in California or using whole house methods, and then you're looking at R values, and all these, the building envelope is becoming more and more and more complex. Right. And a big piece of glass is a great way for heat to get out or cold to get in or whatever. And so we're now saying, at Andersen and we're creating, thermally improved products and thermally broken products and things like that. And say, okay, well, the natural thought process there is that it has to get bigger. Well, that means that you're losing glass and you're losing sight lines. And we want to be looking out the glass, not at a wider and wider style. And so that's where the design and the innovation and new products and things like that we're always looking for is a way to minimize the drawback while being able to increase performance, right? And so like thermal's a big one right now. And where, as everyone wants to get narrower and narrower styles, especially like in contemporary affluent communities, right? That's where like MQ comes in with steel, right? Because you can get narrower profiles and still have thermal breaks, as opposed to other products where you look at like, Montauk or Martha's Vineyard or places where all mahogany door products, are really popular. And those obviously perform really well because there's no metal, right? But then that doesn't transition other places. And so that's where the ability to have something that is structurally sound enough to build to have a large piece of glass and thermally capable and keeps out the air and the water. Like there's no wonder that, I think you guys toured the Garofalo Center at Andersen. Yeah. No wonder Andersen has hundreds of engineers, right? Because there's a lot that goes into that, and there's a lot of testing and requirements that they need to do. And not only do they have to design it, it also has to last a long time, right? You can't have a product like this and a home like this and have it have a shelf life of like 5 years, right? It's got to keep going. And so that's where how long it takes different people to adopt. That's why I used to like walking around IBS. You kind of see phases of, oh, that manufacturer did that, and Mervin did that, and Pella did that, and you go around all the door. I also look at Kohler and toilets and things, but mainly I'm looking at all the doors, right? And so you say, okay, well, you kind of watch that design trend go through, and who adopted it first, and where it comes from, and why we're even bothering to do it. And it's really Sometimes it's, like we said, it's also social media. Somebody sees something cool and then suddenly now brass hardware is coming back. I mean, who predicted that? I didn't think that was going to be a thing. But then sometimes it's just building codes. The city passes a new law, or like Miami-Dade says this is how it shall be. And now you got different states adopting their building code, which is just deeply confusing. And we got to make sure we're getting through all of that and staying with the times and making sure that we've got those products that fit all of those requirements. There's a lot going on, right? So
then throw in a historic district into the mix and try to, that's what we deal with a lot. That's why we end up with that MQ product is because I have all of those huge crazy factors, hurricane rating, all of that stuff, and then you got to have historic approval. So, those are the things that really drive it.
Speaking of the Builder Show, I feel like the first time I went to the Builder Show, you guys had a display showing a big curved door.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it had screens as well.
At which show? At IBS?
Yeah. I mean, this was definitely more than 10 years ago. But you had it was mahogany, if I remember correctly. I've thought about this door since I've seen it, and I've never seen it again. But I tell everyone, I'm like, they had this crazy door. It was all curved glass. It opened up like two doors opened up are on this curved track, and every time I get to the point, I'm like, and they had a curved screen, and they're like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, I swear to God, they had a screen on that door. So yeah. I'm part of me is just curious if I'm at all accurate. Like, do you know if they make a curved screen, just so I can tell everyone? And the other part of me is like, do you guys still do the curves?
Right now, so that door was right. There was a curved door at IBS for years, and there was a version that was before when I started attending IBS. So I don't know whether or not that one had a screen, but I can tell you right now, I'm on a door that is a pocketing curve. And it meets in the middle, and then the curve goes the other direction. So it is a inward curve meeting an outward curve with a pocket on either end, like an S, and it has screens.
Oh, perfect. God.
So, I mean, they exist. We make them.
It's like $1,000 door.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah,
$1,000.
Yeah,
all in.
Yeah. Screens. I always think the same way. Like you say, curved screen. You're like, yeah, but how does that doesn't work? But it depends on the radius, right? But they will do curved screens. It is going to bisect that radius a little bit, right? It's going to go between those 2 points, and so the narrower the chord, right? The tighter the radius, so you wouldn't be able to do it because the screen would pull between the two and rub on the glass or something, right? But this particular project at the door, it's got screens, and so it's a huge. It's also, like 11 and a half feet tall or something. So they decided to install an easy one for their first lift slide. It's not a big deal for them. So,
is it installed?
No, we're working on it. So we talked about like sometimes the cues that get people to talk about it earlier. So right now I'm working with, the architect and the builder on that one, because that one, good thing they didn't say, oh, we'll just let the contractor figure out how to install this door.
Imagine.
Right. No, that one they knew, and so that one is in design and it's moving forward, and it's just a cool door. I mean, curved glass is such a wow factor, that's possible.
Is it? So talk to me about I understand curved woodwork, like that makes sense to me, curved metal work. But when you start getting into curved glass, like what, can you get every kind of glass? Can I do triple glazed, like a high performance window in curved? Like, are there limitations to curving glass?
There are limitations, and what I can tell you is that, like, if you look at the difference between like annealed, heat strengthened, and tempered, right? Mm-hmm. And you kind of go down that curve. That heat strengthened is kind of in between those two, right? That one of the more it depends on whether or not we're laminating the glass, and so sometimes they can bend just about anything, right? But then you get distortion factors, it's more prone to breaking. There are different things there. And so like we've found different glass IG makeups that are just a little bit stronger. It depends on what the inner layer is, if it's laminated. But yeah, we'll do like a laminated, two pieces of glass with like a glue layer and then an airspace and then a single pane or potentially another piece of lamy. And so you can get a lot of performance out of curved, but it may be that it's heat strengthened lamy as opposed to tempered, because when you temper, it's more prone to cracking. So most of our spec there is that way. I don't know that I've seen a triple curved unit. I don't know why you couldn't, but typically when we're talking about STC ratings or solar heat gain or things like that, 2 sets of lamy, so it's 4 pieces of glass with a single airspace and a large airspace. Typically that gets what they're looking for, and we can meet that criteria. But yeah, with curved, you always got to think about, distortion factors and then coatings and things like that too, because a curved piece of glass it's even hard to set. Like a glass cup doesn't stick to a curved piece of glass, right? Mm-hmm. So you got to even you're talking about lifts and things like that on your project right now. You got to have glass cups that are, deep dish just so they can even grab the curve. So curve adds a lot of complexity in general. Even with just saying a radius, you say, I want 110 foot or whatever, you pick your radius. The inner door has a different radius than the outer door, right? So which radius are we measuring? We're measuring the outer panel or the inner panel. And so, we try to go through that. That's why with like our curves, like that S door, let's say you got that and you're trying to install it. How on earth would you ever accomplish the layout on something like that? Outward corners or inward corners that are 90 degrees are one thing. And then you get into a 135 degree, outward corner. It gets harder and harder to make sure our layout's there. As soon as we're talking about a curve or an S, they'll print full size bottom templates. Mm-hmm. So that you have to roll out this giant template and lay out in the ground and tape it together. And
yeah, but now for 50 grand, you can get an HP site printer that will print your full layout. They're awesome.
Yeah.
But they're 50 grand and probably not ideal for a residential project. But I think that's where we're at in building. It's like, like myself included, but Jeff, you've been building longer than I have. And it's like, you think about how everything has changed the way we build. And it's like the moment something like, not a site printer, but the moment we go from 2-dimensional drawings to, hey, we can model this in 3D, it changes the entire course of how we're building. It's like, now I can build things that are completely like multi-dimensional because I can understand how to build it, because I can manipulate a model. Where it's like, to be able to communicate that on a 2-dimensional drawing would be nearly impossible. And I think it's the same thing with these windows and doors. It's like, the reason that you're like, to do an S door 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, like, I'm sure someone did it, but it was probably it was enormously expensive, super complicated, and, and time consuming. And, and to be able to do it today, because we have, the technology and computers and things like, being able to print out a full size, draw an accurate full size 2-scale drawing to be able to put that on the floor and understand it. It's like, that's what allows us to do this stuff on a more, I don't want to say normal basis, but at least considered on a more regular basis.
Yeah, I think the technology with the taking the CAD file and cutting the bottom plate out on a CNC, so that way you've got it exact, because it came from the DWG file.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking when you said curved work, I've now seen people doing, their CNC and curved woodwork, and you got the old guys that are out there with their Japanese pole saw cutting and doing their own curves. Things evolve and things change, and computers are definitely helping.
Yeah, and it pushes our creativity. I talk about that constantly. It's like, we did this scoop in a pocket door, and it would have taken hours to do that by hand or even with a router. and just to figure out how to do the layout would have been hours worth of work. And we had it modeled up in an hour, and the CNC did it in an hour. It's 2 hours worth of work, and we end up with this product of this cooler hand scoop in the side of a pocket door, for a couple hours worth of work. And it's not that we couldn't have done it by hand. It's that then it also comes into to play where it's, well, can I charge appropriately? You're paying a carpenter, if a carpenter costs you $50 an hour and it's going to take them all day to do it, it's like, could you really sell it to a client that, hey, to router this scoop in the side of the door is going to be, $400? It's like, do they see the value? Do they see the value in that, where it's like, oh, the CNC does it in an hour. It's, and the CNC cost $1.50 an hour or something like that. I think that's the other side of it. It's, we open these opportunities where they're more cost effective for higher quality. And then of course the other side of it, it's like, well, you can also do the basic stuff on a CNC for less expensive. And now you're making the commodity version even more affordable.
Right. Some of it is design on CNC and then templating with router or things like that. There's ways that you can do that to make things, if it's a little bit more repeatable. And like I said, selling it to the customer, whether or not you can, we've done some where they're talking about they want to make a change or a modification, and we start expressing, okay, we're talking about cost. And then we realize that I'm talking about cost as if I'm the one buying it, but we're also doing a $12 million beach house. And they said, I don't care. This is the way that I want it to be. So sometimes you got to feel out the customer and know what they're really looking for. Sometimes they ask for something, not realizing the cost. And sometimes it's, I want this at any cost. And so we're also, making sure that we're evaluating that. But those ultra custom solutions are just so cool. And it's always fun to be able to work on those, right? That it's fun to be able to do that. And like you said, that pocket door, but then repeatability is where you can make it more cost effective for other customers that see it and want the same thing.
So I had one additional question. So, because I know a lot of people are listening to this and hearing us talk about complicated doors and windows and how complicated they are to install. You guys handle installation of some of your products. How does that work? And, is it for all products or only some?
Well, so we'll do site installation training, right? And so for sometimes the way that works is depending on where you, it's basically the same service, but you can enter it at different points. And so sometimes it's the dealer wanting to spec a product or the architect to spec the product. And so it depends on where you enter the conversation. But ideally what happens there is they say, this is our first lift slide, or this is our first curved door, or first pocket door or corner door, pick your complexity that made them want to talk to us about it. And then we'll go through and have, that meeting that you were talking about where you had to get everybody on the phone and decide what you were going to do to fix the solution with the solar heat gain. We'll do that. So then we gather everybody together, we get all the players, on the phone and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's the product. Here's the rough opening requirements. And we're talking to them as they're framing, make sure that they're there so we can ensure that success. And then we'll have someone go to the job site. So that's an Andersen person that's there guiding them through it. So he's not going to install it for you, but he's definitely going to walk you through it. And the focus of that is primarily the big doors because of just the potential for complexity comparatively to, you've done double hungs before and now you're doing your first Andersen double hung. Obviously, there's Andersen installation guidelines that may vary a little bit, but not as widely as saying you've done a lot of multi-slides and it's your first lift slide, or you've done a bunch of entry doors and now it's your first pivot door, right? And so for some of those door products that are a little bit different, Andersen can be there on the day of install. And it depends on, availability and sites and things like that, because sometimes there's travel associated with that, depending on where we have those people coming from, in the US. But yeah, like I said, the focus is big doors for those, but we do it for just about everything. And those requests, sometimes they get canceled because just talking about it all together on the phone, we're able to just, the builder comes into the conversation and they've got, concerns or questions and they think they need us there all the way through that. But we've got people that are very competent, builders and installers and things like that. They just don't know the answer to these three questions. Yeah. Right. And it's keeping them up at night thinking about that first install they're going to do. And then we answer those questions and then they say, oh, that's it. I I don't even need you guys here. I get it, and then they can call us through that. And so sometimes we'll do, virtual, FaceTime help and things like that when they're putting it in for the first time. But a lot of them do elect to have somebody come out in person, and we can guide them through that, because something always comes up, right? And the more that we can answer those questions early on, that's why we want to get everybody on the phone and talk about it together, to make sure that our roof opening is right, especially if we're traveling, right? I say, can you be at the job site so we can talk about this and walk around your job site before I get on a plane to come look at that project. So, that's where we're starting to offer that more and more, and we're also starting to offer that with a wider variety of entry points. Whether that's just an installer that's stuck, we want to have somebody that they can talk to, and somebody potentially in their area that can drive by and take a look at it, or it's at the dealer level and they're speccing it, or sometimes homeowners, not all that often, right? But sometimes they're the one driving the product. It's like an owner builder kind of situation. But we've got multiple opportunities for education, for help, for site training. And then sometimes those, they're only hitting one product. And so sometimes they'll come out to our facility in Goodyear and then do a hands-on installation training on all the big door products, right, over the course of a couple of days. And so sometimes they get to see all of it at once, but sometimes the house has 5 door products. And so we get to train on all of them at their job site. It just depends on where it is, what it is. There's a lot of variabilities when it comes down to the projects, but the goal is that we want to demystify the installation of big doors, right? It's big. And I tell people that, like, look, it's heavier. Chances are it's a heavier door panel than one you've touched in the past, but it's still a door, right? It's not like we're leaping to rocket engines or something, right? It's still just a door. So let's just go through it. Let's check what we need to check. Let's verify and just ensure success for us when it comes down to putting it together.
We utilize that service, that Andersen service, on all of our installs.
That's what I was gonna
So
ask.
we're fortunate that we have a dealer that has an Andersen, rep built in. So, we basically, every install, he comes to our job site, goes through, checks everything. Sometimes there's a crack in the sash or something, and we get all that stuff addressed and any adjustments made. And it's definitely a great service that we rely on, that Andersen provides.
Yeah. We want to be able to be there for warranty issues, quality issues, things like that. But then also just, aid and things like that. And so them being there and being available to be present out there is really helpful. Yeah. I mean, Andersen's service team, most places.
Even going through those services, like, what do you find is the biggest hang up with your crew when it comes to installing something like a big door?
I think it's just intimidating. I think it's, we install so many windows that everybody has a really high comfort level with it. I think that it's such a, I wouldn't say, I'm not going to call it a basic task, but it's a common task that we've exercised. We got a lot of reps in, but the big doors, it's like a new pitcher, It's like, all right, what's this? There's just a little bit of intimidation about it, and just making sure you get it right.
Do you think if they were called small doors, they wouldn't be as intimidating to install?
Probably, yeah. Ordinary doors.
Andersen's going to be so mad. They're going to be, guys, we're keeping the name Big Doors. Stop ragging on it.
Well, I think Trevor's point is that they're still doors. They're just heavier.
That's the point we want to get across, is that, I mean, they're just, I didn't even think about the fact that they are heavier, because they are definitely heavier. But yeah, they're still doors, and they still do the same thing. They got to open, they got to close, they got to lock, and they got to be weatherproof.
Yeah, and you install, on a ratio basis. Generally speaking, you're installing 4 windows to 1 door in an ordinary house. So, you just get a lot more reps with a window.
Wait, I gotta ask, Jeff, do you track that, or did you just make that up?
I just made that up. It just came right off the top of my head.
I was like, damn. I'm like,
it's not a
that's
statistic. No.
I was like, I want to know what other metrics this guy's tracking on his jobs. It's like 4 windows to 1 door. No, but that's fairly accurate. Like you got to consider how many windows that go in a house. So it's natural that your guys would just get you used to that side of it. So
sure.
Well, used to that side of it with also, like you said, not a simple task, but you're also not typically doing a lot of assembly of a box of components. A window typically comes largely assembled and it goes into the opening, right? And that's where with some of the products like that, we're talking about that S door, right? Or lift slides in general, or pivot doors in general. They're installed and put together in the factory and open and closed and locked and gone through a test prior to actually getting shipped out. So there's some relief of pressure on us when we're out in the field putting it together for the first time. You're not the first person to put that one together. So even though it comes in a box of pieces, that manufacturing facility has already put it together, already checked it for operation, and make sure all those pieces are there to open and close it. So they help take a lot of those things out when you're ordering a really custom product, and you're saying, okay, well, we're going to put this together for the first time. Hopefully all the parts are there. It's like, well, no, somebody already put it together, opened and closed it, and they took pictures of it, right? And said, we put it together, it works. Now we're going to take it back apart, put it in the box, and send it to you, which is definitely convenient to know that really happened. Yeah. Doesn't mean that they're without failure, but it definitely solves a lot of what is this part even for?
That's really interesting. I never thought that. I never thought of that. I would always have thought that these pieces come off an assembly line and are just shipped. I would have never thought that thing was assembled.
I swear, every time I put a piece of furniture together from IKEA, I always have extra hardware. And I'm like, this, it's not just one extra screw of each. It's like a handful. I'm like, what did I miss?
Yeah. That was a little concerning.
Yeah. So far,
they do that just to mess with people.
They have to. But it makes you think. The other day, actually, it happened the other day. I put together a bunk bed for my kids, and I had 2 extra screws. And I'm like, it's the only 2 screws that are left. And come to find out, I put the ladder on backwards. So like the ladder only had 2 out of 4 screws. I'm like,
they're assuming the little dowels and screws are going to roll under your couch while you're assembling it anyway. So you've got to.
No, I had to take it all apart. I was like, I can't. If my kid falls off and this ladder breaks, I'll never hear the end of it. So apart it came. But hey, Trevor, that's cool. I mean, I appreciate you being on. I'm curious, your role. I know you've been with Andersen, you said 10 years. But are you the point contact for someone that that is installing a big door, or should they, if another builder is listening to this and has questions, are you the best person to contact, or should they be reaching out to someone else in their network? How's that work?
Yeah, it depends on where they are in the process. Right. If they're halfway through an installation and they're stuck, we want that phone call to go through our normal process to get them help and things like that, so that they can find their order and things like that. And we've got a team of people that do that. But generally speaking, work with your dealer where you purchase the product and your local Andersen rep, and then they can get you to the right sequence, and then they can get a hold of me, and then I can work with you on the project if we're entering it earlier, if we're entering it later, or there's a quality issue, or depending on where you are in the process and what help you need. Generally, your local rep can help you figure out who to talk to. But you can always just call Andersen directly, and then they'll eventually get you into the bucket that you need to get into. So
awesome. Well, I appreciate you being on today, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Enjoy sunny, hot San Diego. For the record, it was like 97 degrees here last week. So
yeah, it was hot here.
There you go.
But it's nice today. Awesome.
All right.
Well, appreciate it, man. And we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, gentlemen.
I didn't realize that the big door was a product of the acquisition of Wayland.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. I think I kind of alluded to it, but it's interesting to see. I mean, the whole window discussion, tilt turn versus the way Americans do it, forget that. But just big doors in general, like doors have become, become way more popular. They're bigger, they're larger, they're bigger pieces of glass, and it's and they're almost oftentimes replacing windows, especially
Yeah,
like in the
sure.
more modern homes. It's like, oh, we don't have windows, it's a door,
Yeah.
and they're floor to
Yeah,
ceiling.
the technology has allowed it to happen, and the thing that's different though, like even like San Diego. So we have a builder friend out there, and they have these openings that are, 60 feet of glass that open and zero threshold. But guess what? They don't get snow.
Yeah.
So there's every geography has its own uniqueness and its own challenge, and we have snow, we have hurricanes, and we have salt water. So
Yeah.
three very dangerous elements to a window. But I thought it was a cool conversation. I was thinking about we were talking a lot about nailing flanges, and I think that because in America, the United States, it's mostly wood construction.
Yeah.
Right. So
That's
a nailing
fair.
flange
Yeah.
is easy.
Makes sense. Right.
Especially when a solid vinyl window came out,
Yeah.
and it's all extruded. So it was easy. Right. But in Europe, wood is not the primary. Yeah, it's not the primary. So I think that's where we see the difference. So you ask Europeans about a nailing flange, they're going to look at you like you got your head, on wrong.
It's so interesting, and like if anyone that has the opportunity to travel to another country and see the way they build, I think it's worth it. I don't know about you, Jeff, but when I travel, especially with the wife and kids, I always try to go visit a job site, and that never shakes out. So it's only when I go alone or for work. But I mean, some of the ways that they build in these other countries, it makes you scratch your head. It's like, how does that work? And I remember we toured one when I was out with Siga in Switzerland, and it was basically a reverse of what we do, in the sense that it was wood stud with insulation being installed on the exterior, and then just I'm going to use tar paper loosely, but essentially a tar paper in front of it, and then they're cladding. I was like, so your insulation is just exposed?
Exposed, yeah.
And they're like, yeah, it dries because it dries 100%.
Mineral wool?
Yeah. But it just was so interesting. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it just to see that. And then, we went into the project manager's trailer, and I was like, walk me through that wall assembly. I want to understand this.
Yeah. And
how does it work? And he walked you through. It's like, oh yeah, that does
makes
work.
Perfect sense.
Just a different way of doing it.
Yeah.
The MQ stuff, man, that's nice stuff. That's fancy.
Crazy impressive. I mean, crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, when you first price these things, and this is our third job with this style of window, tilt and turn.
Yeah.
And the pricing just knocks your socks off the first time. You're
crazy.
Like, it's incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Then you get the window and you see how they're manufactured. It's the most impressive thing you've ever seen. It's like
it's justifiable at that point.
Yeah. And the weight alone, I mean, it's incredible. But I was thinking about how you talk about nailing flanges, and the advent of, we're going to see exterior insulation become part of the energy code.
100%. And like we're already seeing it. Other parts of the country are requiring it. Parts of Canada, it's been required for the last 10 years. It's 100% coming. So that's exactly where I was going with that conversation, is that I think these nailing flanges
are a pain in the ass.
They're going to become more of a pain in the ass. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see who gives them up.
Right. Well, it definitely sheds a new light. The first time you get one, you're like, where's the nailing flange? How am I going to install this?
Right.
And then the installation couldn't be easier.
Yeah.
So the ability to slide that thing outboard to be flush with your exterior insulation, and you skip a whole step of bucking that opening out so that you have a nailing flange. So
yeah,
we'll see. Who's going to give them up first? That's a great question. We've become so adjusted to it. I think that
it's going to be really, like, I keep saying, it's going to be really interesting to see our industry in the next 10 years. Because not only is code getting more strict, but technology is evolving so fast. And there's a lot of guys that just don't want to change.
Right.
And, it'll be something like exterior insulation, like, oh, it's mandated. And that guy's just gonna be like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm done.
I'm out.
Like, I've been doing 2x4 and 5-glass bats my whole life. I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore.
A house has got to breathe.
Yeah.
Right. That's what
through the cavities.
Yeah. It's got to breathe.
Jeff. So I alluded to it in the episode, but I want to give you a fair chance. So Sawdust, Andersen's a sponsor. Yeah. How many episodes you got out now?
I think the first season we got 12. The second season we're at about 8.
Damn.
You're
cranking.
We're on a cadence of about 1 a month.
Nice.
And it's comfortable. Like it's not hair on fire.
Wait, you don't have 20 posted?
Yeah.
Are they all?
Yeah.
There's 20 posted already?
Yeah.
Oh, season I got you.
1 we did.
Yeah, that was a couple years ago.
2020. Yeah.
Okay, I thought you. Yeah.
But the second round, our second version, we've got. I think there's 8. Maybe the 8th one is coming up. I can't remember. I lost count. But
sure.
It's cool. It's fun because it can be about the guys. Like I don't need it. I don't want it about me. It's not me. I'm not the company.
Right.
That I'm not installing your windows,
Right.
So it really gives us the ability to dive in, and we've really taken a deep dive into our cabinetry, and really following a whole project on where we're building, essentially every piece of cabinetry in the house.
Love
kitchen, every vanity, built-ins, you name it. About 10,000 square feet worth, and so it gives us the ability to showcase that, and
Sweet. And that's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube.
There you go. Yeah. YouTube Sweenor Builders.
There you go.
We'll see you guys next week.
All right.